The wind howled across the open plains, carrying with it the sting of snow and loneliness. Inside a modest ranch house, a single lantern flickered weakly, throwing long shadows against the wooden walls. Elias Carter, a man not yet 40 but already worn by loss and hard years, rocked his baby in his arms, whispering quiet comforts she didn't seem to hear. Little Clara's fever had risen again, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching as she cried into his chest. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. The medicine had run low, and the storm outside made the 20-mile ride to town impossible. He tried to hum the lullaby his late wife used to sing, but the memory of her voice caught in his throat. The house that once echoed with her laughter now felt hollow, filled only with the creak of the rocking chair and the baby's ragged sobs. Then a knock. It was sharp and sudden, cutting through the sound of the storm. Elias froze. Out here, visitors were rare in daylight. At midnight, they were unheard of. His first thought was danger, thieves or worse. The second knock came, weaker but desperate. He rose slowly, careful not to jostle the baby, and crossed to the door. The hinges groaned as he unlatched it. The wind slammed against him, flinging snow inside. There on the porch stood a young woman, drenched, shivering, her clothes clinging to her thin frame. She could barely hold herself upright. Her lips were blue from cold and her hair stuck to her cheeks. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke, the only sound the crying baby and the howl of the storm. "Please," she said finally, her voice cracking. "I don't mean harm. I just need work, or shelter. Just for tonight." Elias's jaw tightened. He scanned the darkness beyond her, half expecting someone else to appear. No horse, no wagon, just her. She'd walked here through a blizzard. That alone told him how desperate she must be. Still, years on the frontier had taught him caution. "You're traveling alone?" he asked. She nodded, teeth chattering. "I'll work for food, anything. Please, the baby, she's crying." Elias looked down at Clara. She was indeed crying louder, face red and wet with tears. But then as the woman reached out instinctively, just to touch the child's blanket, Clara's sobs slowed. For the first time in hours, she fell quiet, staring up at the stranger with wide eyes. Something shifted in the air. Elias didn't understand it, but he felt it, like the house itself had taken a deep breath. He hesitated, then stepped aside. "Come in." The woman stumbled past him, half collapsing near the fire. He shut the door against the wind and placed the baby in her crib before turning back. The stranger's hands trembled as she held them near the flame. He fetched a blanket from the back room and handed it to her without a word. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling it around her shoulders. "My name's Mara." Elias gave a short nod. "Elias Carter. You can stay the night. We'll figure the rest in the morning." Her eyes lifted to his, green, rimmed with fatigue but full of quiet gratitude. "I'll earn it," she said softly. "I always do." He didn't answer, just returned to rocking his baby, watching her in the dim glow of the fire. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the little ranch house, something unseen began to settle, a fragile calm, a sliver of hope breaking through the dark. And as the night wore on, Elias found himself wondering not who this woman was, but why it felt as though fate had carried her to his door exactly when he needed someone most. When Elias awoke, it was to an unfamiliar quiet. The storm had passed, leaving a brittle calm across the ranch. Snow blanketed the world outside, so deep it swallowed the fence posts and shimmered like glass under the pale morning sun. For the first time in days, baby Clara wasn't crying. Elias blinked the sleep from his eyes, disoriented. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, certainly not in the chair by the fire. The last thing he remembered was sitting near the hearth, listening to the stranger's breathing even out as she slept on the rug. Now the fire was low and the scent of something warm drifted through the room. He rose, wary, and followed the smell to the kitchen. There by the stove, Mara stood, his unexpected guest, wearing a clean but oversized shirt he recognized as one of his old ones from the wash pile. Her dark hair was tied loosely at her neck, still damp, and she was ladling porridge into a tin bowl. Clara sat in a basket near her feet, wide-eyed and giggling as the woman hummed softly. Elias froze in the doorway. The scene was almost domestic. Something about it tightened his chest. Mara looked up when she sensed him. "Good morning," she said quietly. "I hope you don't mind. I found oats and thought the little one might be hungry." He crossed his arms. "You went through my cupboards?" Her hands paused mid-stir. "Only to find food for the baby," she said quickly, her tone careful. "You were asleep." She was fussing. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Years of loss and hardship had made Elias slow to trust, especially strangers who arrived in the night with half-told stories. "You said you came looking for work," he said finally. "You run from something or someone?" Her spoon clattered softly against the pot. "I came from town," she said. "Worked for a family there until they moved. Left me without pay, without a place to go. I just started walking." It was a simple explanation. Too simple. Yet something in her voice, the fatigue, the quiet shame, sounded real. Elias nodded toward the window. "You won't get far in that snow." "I can work for a meal," she said quickly. "Help with the baby, chores, anything." He didn't respond at once. The practical part of him wanted her gone as soon as the roads cleared. His life was complicated enough without strangers under his roof. But another part, quieter and harder to ignore, remembered how Clara had stilled the moment Mara touched her. "You can stay," he said at last. "For now. You work, you eat. That's fair." Relief softened her face, but she didn't smile. "Thank you." He watched as she set the bowl in front of him. Oats, a drizzle of honey, nothing fancy but hot and filling. He picked up the spoon and ate in silence, acutely aware of the woman's presence in his kitchen. She moved quietly, her motions efficient and practiced, like someone used to doing for others. After breakfast, Elias busied himself with chores, still uneasy. From the barn he could see her through the window, washing dishes, humming softly as Clara watched from her basket. Every so often, Mara glanced toward the door as if listening for something, or someone. That small, guarded gesture told him more than her words had. Whoever she was, whatever had driven her here, she wasn't just a lost worker. She was hiding. And though Elias told himself to keep his distance, a thought settled in the back of his mind and refused to leave. Perhaps the baby wasn't the only one in his home who needed saving. The next few days passed in a hush that seemed to settle over the ranch like snow. Mara kept mostly to herself, rising before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast, never waiting to be told what needed doing. She moved quietly through the house, washing, mending, sweeping, her presence barely more than a whisper. Elias watched her work from a distance, his natural wariness still intact. He wasn't sure what to make of her. She didn't pry, didn't complain, didn't speak unless spoken to. And yet, she seemed to sense exactly what needed attention. The leaky patch of the roof above the porch, the warped door that wouldn't shut right, the worn baby clothes that needed patching. It was as if she had been running a household all her life. The baby, little Clara, had taken to her immediately. When Mara sang, Clara would coo and kick her feet. When Mara carried her on her hip, the child would rest her cheek against her shoulder and drift to sleep without fuss. Elias couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his daughter so calm, and still a part of him resisted the peace. On the third morning, he found Mara outside hanging laundry despite the chill. The sunlight was thin and cold, but it glimmered against the frost as she pinned sheets to the line. Her hands were red from the water, but she worked steadily, her expression far away. "You don't have to do all that," Elias said from the porch, his voice rough. "It's too cold for washing." She turned slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The little one's clothes were nearly gone through. "I didn't think you'd want her wearing rags." He frowned, feeling oddly chastised. "You could have waited till the thaw." Her eyes flicked to his, a spark of something, defiance maybe, lighting there. "If I waited for better weather, I'd never get anything done." For a moment, Elias didn't know whether to admire her or be irritated. He gave a short grunt, then went back to the barn. But as he worked, her words echoed in his mind. That night after supper, he noticed how Mara always took the smallest portion, serving him and the baby first. She ate standing up near the window, her gaze turned toward the dark horizon. The gesture wasn't just politeness, it was habit. A servant's habit. "You can sit," he said finally, gesturing to the table. Her spoon paused mid-air. "I'm fine standing." "I didn't ask if you were fine," he replied, his tone softer than he intended. "I asked you to sit." She hesitated, then obeyed. For a moment their eyes met, and Elias saw something flicker there. Caution. Yes, but also gratitude. The house grew quiet again, filled only with the crackle of the fire and Clara's soft breaths from her crib. Elias leaned back in his chair, watching the flames. He thought about the way Mara had looked when he'd opened the door that first night. Cold, desperate, alone. She was still those things, he realized, only better hidden now. "Where did you learn to work like that?" he asked suddenly. Her gaze stayed on the fire. "When you grow up with nothing, you learn to make yourself useful. It's the only way to survive." There was no bitterness in her tone, only fact. Elias nodded slowly. Later, after she'd gone to bed, he lingered by Clara's crib, staring into the flickering light. The house no longer felt empty, but it didn't quite feel whole either. It was as though two broken lives had collided by accident, circling each other carefully, afraid to touch the pieces that still hurt. He told himself it was only temporary. She'd move on once the roads cleared. But as the baby sighed in her sleep, and the faint sound of Mara's quiet breathing reached him from the next room, Elias wasn't sure he believed that anymore. Winter began to soften its hold. The days grew a little longer, the winds less cruel, and sunlight began to creep through the windows once more. Inside the Carter Ranch, the change was just as subtle, but just as real. For the first time in months, there was laughter in the house. It was small and bright, like the chime of a bell, Clara's laughter. It started one morning when Mara sat on the rug, the baby in her lap, showing her how to hold a wooden spoon. Clara banged it clumsily against a tin bowl and squealed with delight. Mara laughed, the sound clear and warm. And when Elias came in from the barn, wiping his hands on his coat, he froze in the doorway. He hadn't heard that sound, not from anyone, in a long time. Mara turned, cheeks flushed, eyes alight. "She's learning rhythm," she said, smiling a little as she steadied the baby's tiny hands. Elias grunted, pretending to be unmoved, but his eyes softened. "Looks like you've got her working already," he said dryly. Mara smiled faintly. "Better she learns early. Idle hands get you in trouble." Their eyes met for a heartbeat longer than either intended. Something gentle passed between them, unspoken understanding, maybe even comfort. Then Clara banged her spoon again, and they both chuckled. Over the following weeks, the ranch began to feel alive again. Mara tended the kitchen garden as the frost melted, humming softly as she worked. She mended Elias's shirts, patched his gloves, and even taught him a trick or two about soothing Clara's fussing. He, in turn, showed her how to tend the horses, how to tell when a storm was coming, and how to check the fences. Each day, the rhythm between them grew easier, more natural. Still, Elias tried to remind himself that she was temporary. She had her own life to return to, wherever that was. Yet each evening when he came in and saw her rocking Clara by the fire, the thought of her leaving stirred something hollow in his chest. One evening, he came home to find Mara kneeling by the hearth, her sleeves rolled up, hair falling loose as she scrubbed a pot. The baby, sitting on a quilt nearby, was babbling nonsense in perfect contentment. The scene, warm light, soft laughter, the smell of stew, felt like something out of another life, one he thought had died with his wife. "You're working too hard," he said quietly. Setting his gloves on the table, Mara glanced up. "Work's the only thing that keeps my hands from remembering everything else." Elias paused, studying her. "And what is it you're trying not to remember?" Her gaze dropped to the soapy water. A life I ran from. He didn't press her. Instead, he poured himself coffee and sat across the room, watching Clara reach for Mara's braid. The baby's laughter filled the air again, soft, sweet, alive. That night, after putting Clara to bed, Elias stood by the window, staring out at the faint glow of the moon over the fields. Behind him, Mara tidied the table. The silence was comfortable now, not heavy. "She's taken to you," he said finally, his voice low. Mara froze mid-motion. "I didn't mean to overstep." He turned, shaking his head. "It's not that, it's good for her." He hesitated, then added, "Good for me, too." Something flickered in Mara's expression. Surprise, maybe even a hint of warmth. "You've both been kind to me," she said softly. Elias met her eyes. "I don't think kindness has much to do with it." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a coyote howled faintly in the distance. Inside, the house felt safe, full again. Elias didn't yet realize it. But the laughter of his baby, and the presence of the woman who had brought it back, was quietly stitching together the pieces of his heart he thought were gone forever. The peace that had slowly settled over the Carter ranch didn't last. Spring brought color back to the land, but with it came whispers from town. It was a Tuesday morning when Elias rode into Mill Creek to trade supplies. The air was crisp and the general store buzzed with talk. As he handed over his list to the shopkeeper, he couldn't help overhearing two men by the counter. "Sheriff says there's a fella asking questions," one said. "Looking for a young woman, thin thing, dark hair, about yay high. Says she ran off from the Wexler estate." Elias froze. The name Wexler meant money and power, the kind of people who didn't lose servants without making noise. "He's saying she stole something," the other man continued. "Won't say what, though." Elias finished his purchase quietly, jaw tightening. He didn't ask questions, didn't linger, but the whole ride home the words burned in his head. Dark hair, runaway, thief. By the time he reached the ranch, the sun was sinking low, and the fields glowed gold. Mara was out in the yard hanging laundry. Clara was in a basket nearby, giggling as the sheets flapped in the wind. It looked peaceful, so painfully ordinary that Elias felt an ache behind his ribs. He dismounted slowly, studying her. She caught his gaze and smiled, but her smile faltered when she saw the storm in his eyes. "Everything all right?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took off his gloves, his movements deliberate. "Who's looking for you, Mara?" Her face went still, color draining from her cheeks. "What do you mean? In town. Someone's been asking about a runaway from the Wexler's place. A girl who fits your description." His voice was calm, but his eyes were hard. "Is that you?" Mara's hands trembled around the wet cloth she was holding. For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly she nodded. "Yes." Elias felt something twist in his chest. Anger, confusion, disappointment, maybe all three. "And the theft? Is that true?" Her breath hitched. "No, I swear it isn't." She took a small step toward him, eyes wide, pleading. "I didn't steal anything. I ran because it wasn't safe there." He said nothing, just waited. Mara swallowed hard, her voice shaking as the words spilled out. "The Wexler's son, he wasn't kind. He'd corner me when no one was around. Said no one would believe me if I spoke up. When I refused him, he told his father I was a thief. That's why I left. I had to." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "You can send me off if you want." "I won't blame you, I couldn't go back there." Elias stood motionless. The baby cooed softly in the basket nearby, the only sound between them. He wanted to believe her. Every instinct in him did, but life had taught him that trust could cost dearly. After a long silence, he said quietly, "You should have told me." "I was afraid," she whispered. "People don't usually listen to women like me." Something inside him softened at that, the weariness in her voice, the truth in it. He turned away, running a rough hand through his hair. "I'll handle it," he muttered finally. Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "If that man comes here looking for you," he said, meeting her eyes, "he'll answer to me first." Mara's breath caught, eyes glistening with relief and disbelief. "You'd do that? Even if it means trouble?" Elias looked toward the house where the light of the fire flickered in the window. "Trouble's already here," he said quietly. "Might as well see it through." For the first time since she'd arrived, Mara felt truly seen, not as a burden, not as a servant, but as someone worth standing for. Still, as the evening wind rose around them, both knew the peace they'd built was about to be tested, and this time, neither would walk away unchanged. The man came 3 days later. It was early afternoon, the sky clear and still. Elias had been in the barn, mending a broken gate, when he heard the distant crunch of wheels on gravel. His stomach tightened. No one came out this far unless they had a reason. By the time he stepped outside, a black carriage had pulled up to the house. A tall, well-fed man in a fine coat climbed down, brushing the dust from his sleeves. His hat was too new, his boots too clean. A man from comfort, not from work. Elias stood silently by the fence as the man approached. "You Elias Carter?" the stranger asked, his voice sharp and full of entitlement. "I am," Elias said. "What's your business?" The man glanced around the yard, then toward the porch where Mara had appeared, holding Clara protectively in her arms. At the sight of her, the man's lips curled into a smug smile. "There you are," he said, taking a step forward. "You've caused a fair bit of trouble, girl. Mr. Wexler sent me to fetch you back." Mara's face went pale, but she didn't move. Elias stepped between them, his broad frame blocking the man's path. "She's under my roof," he said evenly. "If you've come to make accusations, you can do it to me." The man sneered. "She's a servant who stole from her employers and ran. I've got every right to take her back." Elias folded his arms. "You got proof of that?" "She was caught with missing jewelry." "Was she caught or just blamed?" Elias's voice was calm, but his tone cut like a blade. "You've got papers, witness statements, anything?" The man faltered for a moment, not expecting the challenge. "Her word means nothing," he snapped. "She's a liar and a thief." Elias's eyes darkened. "Careful what you call people under my roof." Mara shifted behind him, clutching the baby close, her breath quick and shallow. The man tried again, his voice dripping disdain. "You think you can hide her out here? You'll regret getting involved, rancher. The Wexlers have influence. They can make life difficult for men who stand in their way." Elias stepped closer until the man had to tilt his head back to meet his eyes. "I buried my wife on this land," he said quietly. "Nearly lost my baby too. You think I scare easy?" For a moment silence hung between them, heavy as thunder. Then the man's confidence faltered. He spat into the dirt, muttered something about fools and beggars, and turned toward his carriage. As the wheels rolled away, the tension broke like a string pulled too tight. Mara sank onto the porch steps, trembling. Elias turned back to her, his voice softer now. "He won't be back soon." She looked up at him, eyes full of tears. "You didn't have to do that. Now he'll spread talk. Let him," Elias said. "Talk's cheap, but your reputation doesn't mean much out here," he interrupted gently. "Not compared to the truth." Mara lowered her gaze, clutching Clara close. The baby reached up and touched her chin as if sensing her mother's trembling. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Elias sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. "You did what you had to," he said. "No one should have blamed you for that." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were silent, steady. "You don't know what it means to be believed," she whispered. Elias looked at her. Really looked at her. The strength behind her gentleness, the fear buried under her composure. "Maybe I do," he said quietly. "You're not the only one who's been lost before." The wind shifted softly through the fields, and for the first time since that midnight knock, Mara allowed herself to breathe fully. Elias had drawn a line in the dirt for her, and in doing so, something invisible but powerful had changed between them. It was no longer just shelter she had found here. It was safety. And for the first time in years, Elias Carter no longer felt like the loneliest man on the prairie. Spring spread across the plains in soft green waves. The snow was gone, replaced by budding wildflowers and the hum of bees drifting through the air. Life on the ranch found a new rhythm, one shaped not by grief or fear but by quiet companionship. Mara had settled into her place naturally, though neither she nor Elias ever spoke of permanence. She cooked, cleaned, and tended to Clara with the ease of someone who had always belonged. But it wasn't just chores. She'd brought warmth back to every corner of the house. There were fresh flowers on the table, bread baking in the oven, and laughter echoing from the porch when Clara toddled clumsily in her first steps. Elias would catch himself smiling more often now. Real smiles, the kind that reached his eyes. Some evenings he'd come in from the fields to find Mara reading softly to the baby, her voice lilting and tender. Other nights they'd sit together by the fire talking about little things. Weather, crops, old memories. She listened when he spoke, truly listened, as if each word mattered. One evening after supper, Mara sat by the window mending a tear in Elias's coat. The light from the oil lamp framed her face, and for the first time, he noticed the way her hair caught the glow like threads of bronze. Clara played nearby, giggling at the sight of her father trying to carve a wooden toy horse. The moment felt peaceful, so ordinary and yet so precious. "You've made the place feel alive again," Elias said quietly, breaking the silence. Mara looked up from her stitching, surprised. "It's your home," she said. "I only keep it tidy." He shook his head. "No, it wasn't a home before. It was just a house with memories that hurt to look at." He paused, searching for the right words. "You changed that." Her hand stilled on the fabric, and for a long moment she didn't answer. Then she said softly, "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find it was all just a kindness you offered. That I don't really belong here." Elias leaned back, meeting her gaze. "You do belong here, Mara. More than you think." Her eyes glistened, but she quickly turned back to her sewing, blinking hard. "I never thought I'd hear anyone say that," she whispered. Later that night, after Clara was asleep, Mara lingered in the doorway of the nursery, watching the baby's tiny chest rise and fall. Elias joined her quietly. The soft lamplight pooled around them, wrapping the room in warmth. "She looks so peaceful," Mara said, smiling faintly. "She reminds me what safety feels like." Elias's voice was low. "She's that for me too." They stood in silence for a while, the space between them filled with something that didn't need words. Trust, gratitude, and something deeper neither dared name. When Mara finally turned to leave, Elias reached out and caught her hand, rough fingers brushing her knuckles. She froze, heart thudding. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse, "for staying, for caring, for her, and for this place." Her eyes lifted to his, and she saw in them all the things he couldn't say aloud, the grief he'd carried alone for so long, and the quiet hope that had begun to take its place. "I should be thanking you," she murmured. "You gave me back my life." Their hands lingered for a moment longer before she gently pulled away. But as she walked down the hall, her fingers still tingled where his had touched hers. That night, neither of them slept easily. Both lay awake, Elias listening to the wind against the eaves, Mara to the soft sighs of the baby, and each wondering the same thing. Was it possible that what had begun as survival had turned into something that looked very much like love? The first light of dawn crept slowly across the plains, spilling through the ranch windows in pale gold. The world was quiet except for the soft cry of Clara waking in her crib. Mara rose from bed and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, moving with practiced ease toward the nursery. She lifted the baby into her arms, humming a lullaby she'd learned long ago from her mother, a tune of hope and second chances. Elias heard the soft melody as he stepped out of his room, boots in hand. He paused by the door, watching Mara sway gently with the child. The light framed her in soft gold, and in that moment she looked like she belonged to the morning itself, strong, gentle, and full of quiet grace. When she noticed him, she smiled. "She didn't sleep much last night. I think she's teething." He nodded, stepping closer. "You always seem to know what she needs." Mara looked down at the baby, who was now tugging at her braid with curious fingers. "Maybe because I needed the same things once: kindness, a little safety, someone to hold on to." Her words hung in the air between them, tender and true. Elias swallowed hard, the weight of all they'd shared pressing gently on his chest. Months ago, she'd been a stranger knocking on his door in a storm. Now, she was the steady presence his home had needed, and perhaps the one his heart had been waiting for. When the morning chores were done, Elias hitched up the wagon. He said he needed to drive into town for supplies and asked Mara to come along. She hesitated at first, unsure if she should leave the baby behind, but he insisted they'd take Clara too. "It'll do us all some good," he said. The ride into town was quiet but comfortable. The air smelled of thawing earth and wild sage. Clara gurgled in Mara's lap, delighted by the passing scenery. Elias stole glances at them both. Mara's smile, the warmth in her voice, the easy way she'd become part of his world. When they reached town, a few people greeted them with curious looks. Word had long spread about the woman who came to the ranch in the middle of the night, but their whispers didn't bother Mara anymore. Elias's calm presence beside her gave her courage. At the general store, Elias bought feed, lamp oil, and a small bolt of blue fabric. When Mara raised a brow at it, he only smiled. "For you," he said. "Figured you might make a dress that isn't patched from old flour sacks." She laughed softly, a sound like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You shouldn't have." "I wanted to," he replied simply. On the way back home, clouds began to roll in, dark and heavy, but neither of them minded. The rain, when it came, was warm and gentle, washing the dust from the land. They reached the ranch just as it turned into a downpour, running together for shelter, laughing as they stumbled onto the porch. Inside, soaked and breathless, Mara turned toward Elias to speak, but before she could, he reached out and took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice rough, "about what this place means now, about what you mean here." Mara's heart raced. "Elias," he shook his head softly, eyes never leaving hers. "When you came that night, I thought I was doing you a kindness. But truth is, you were the one who saved me. You gave Clara a mother's love again. And you gave me a reason to look toward tomorrow. Tears welled in her eyes as he continued. I don't know what the future holds, Mara, but I'd like you to stay, not as a worker, not out of pity, but as part of this family. If you'll have us. Her breath caught. For a moment all she could do was stare at him through her tears. Then she stepped closer, cradling his rough hand between both of hers. I already do, she whispered. Outside, the rain slowed to a gentle drizzle, the kind that made the earth smell new. Inside, the ranch felt more alive than ever. A home built not from necessity, but from trust, healing, and love found in the unlikeliest hour. As the baby cooed between them, Elias and Mara shared a quiet smile. The desperate knock in the night had become the beginning of everything. Proof that sometimes, when the world seems darkest, love is the one light that never fails to open the door.